and welcome to the Zoli Mamzel podcast with Magali
and Hansini, where we have thought-provoking conversations about journeys, life, and much more. Catch our latest episodes every Monday.
Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Zoli Mamzel podcast. I hope you're all doing well, and today we have two special guests with us, and they're actually from the Zoli Mamzel team. I welcome Divya and Mansi. Please just give an introduction to yourselves. Divya.
Hi, how are you girls?
Good, thank you.
Yeah, good, thanks. Hi, I'm Divya. I'm one of the Zoli Mamzel editors and I help behind the scenes mostly. So yeah, and it's nice to be here.
Yeah, no, we're excited because we always have like conversations during our team meetings. So we thought, why not do an episode with the team?
Hello, my name's Mansi and I'm currently a content creator at Zoli Mamzel. I write some educational posts and I have a little series coming out called upbringings. And I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation with you guys.
Yeah, sounds good. And yeah, so everyone should literally keep their eyes peeled out for Mansi's upcoming posts. They're really, thought-provoking and like just really interesting. It's going to get conversation going, hopefully. So this episode is going to be sort of like a fun one. We have like a question that we sort of want to discuss and see everyone's perspectives and what they think. And
so today we're going to be talking about culture and interracial marriages, our opinions on them. And the question that we've got today is, when you marry someone from a different culture or a different race, do you lose out? Not specifically you, but do you tend to lose out on your culture? Do your kids tend to kind of miss out on both sides? So what's everyone's opinion on that?
I think we should also like throw it out there that none of us are sort of married.
Yeah, nowhere near. So this is actually very much like our opinion right now from what we've seen, what we've experienced, I guess.
Yeah.
But we'll do a review in like 10 years time.
10 years time. Yeah, I was gonna say.
See where we're at.
I was gonna say I'm still single, so I'm still yet to experience any of that.
Divya's putting it out there.
Just put it out there, you know.
I'm not married, but I have been in a 1-year relationship with someone who's a different culture, in the sense that I'm Mauritian and they're British, and different race. I'm brown and he's black.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your experience been like in terms of navigating through like different cultures?
I think at the start it was definitely quite hard because there was a lack of understanding there. That a lot of the language that was being used, or even the way situations panned out, and the way I would look at those situations or the way he would look at those situations were very different. And not just in terms of our relationship, but also outside of our relationship. There were a lot of things that we would agree on, but there was also a lot of things that we would disagree on. I can't really think of a specific example at the moment, but I do remember at the start of the relationship when I was struggling with finding a place in British culture coming from Mauritius. There was a lot of tension there because we were just friends at the start, and there was a lot of tension there in the sense that I was just, and he's described me as this from the first time he met me. He said, you were just unique and people struggled to understand you, and that's all that happened there. And it wasn't that people didn't like you, it's just they just couldn't understand who you were at the very start. And that kind of transcended in my relationship with him. And he was one of the first people who actually tried to understand me and think outside the box of, why is this girl like this and why does she see these situations like this? And that's probably why we clicked so well. But yeah, that's basically what it was at the very start.
Oh, that sounds really nice actually, because it's true. Because I think sometimes you're right, like sometimes you think, oh, people don't like me, but it's not that they don't like me, so that they don't understand how you are.
Definitely.
And most of the time people aren't as open-minded as we'd like them to be. So how did like culture come into place in terms of like, I don't know, did you try sort of explaining like the Mauritian culture to him and vice versa?
Well, the thing is, we didn't really clash on culture that much as we got into our relationship and got to know each other that much better. It's because also he's from London, so he already has that multicultural side to him where he's had a diverse group of friends. Before he even met me, he already had about 3 people who were Mauritian in his group of friends.
Oh, wow.
This is where we kind of clash, because his experience with Mauritian people were British Mauritian people. They weren't. It's not that they aren't Mauritian, but they just weren't brought up in Mauritius. So there was a bit of tension there, because he just assumed a lot of things from what he had experienced with his own friends, and thought that it would kind of translate the same, in my relationship with him. But a lot of things I wasn't aware of. A lot of things basically, just the way you speak to people, the way you become friends with people, a lot of things, my approach were quite different. Because he was from London, and I feel like that's a rule that applies to all Londoners, you just know everyone. You kind of just know everyone in London. So I think in his head, it was like, oh, I already have these skills. I can become friends with people really easily. And when he approached me, it was in a very friendly way, but it was also very out there. And I was really reserved at the start, because I came from a different culture. There was a lot of things I was scared of saying. I just didn't know how to navigate situations and conversations, basically. It's not that I was completely inept. It's just, obviously, there was the constant anxiety at the back of my head thinking, oh, I'm going to say something stupid now. I'm going to say something that is not going to make sense. Because a lot of times when I would say something, it would be the literal meaning of it, but he just wouldn't understand. And this wasn't a breakdown in language. This wasn't a breakdown in communications. This was genuinely just, completely different way of using language and completely different way of using these non-verbals and verbal words, basically.
When you come from London, or when you've lived in London, we almost feel like it's a bit of a bubble. It's kind of the end all be all, like this is the best place, and you know everything. I think there's some sort of confidence that comes from coming from London. Then when you step out, you realize there's a whole world outside. Because London's got this reputation of being so diverse, we think that we have actually experienced a lot of it until we step out and we realize, oh wait, no, we haven't. It's like there's so much more outside.
That's exactly what he told me. Like 6 months into getting to know each other, he just told me that he kind of took for granted the fact that he had such a knowledge of diverse people in his group, that he just took that for granted when he came to uni, because he didn't think that he was going to meet anyone that was going to break that norm that he was exposed to.
Yeah, definitely. I felt that too. Like going into uni, I was like, I've lived in London. It can't get any more diverse than this.
Yeah.
And then I went to Norwich, which is in the middle of not really in the middle of nowhere, but then you meet literally all different types of people, and you're like, whoa, okay,
definitely
culture shock, literally.
So back to your point about you were scared that you say something like stupid, but I think that highlights like Mauritian culture as well, because a lot of the things probably you wouldn't say in Mauritius, but you can be open here. Is that right?
Technically, yeah, in the sense that when I first came to uni, it was very alien to me, because I identify as bisexual. When I first came to uni, I was really unaware of how people talk about these things here, because it was something so different for me. I had only just started thinking about sexuality, reading on sexuality, understanding it myself alongside my friends. I'm really lucky that back at home, all my friends are really open-minded. A lot of them are also LGBTQ+. So that was a learning experience for me. But it was so close to the time when I was coming to England that when I did come here, for me, it was such a weird topic to try and bring up, because I was scared of what people would think. Are they open-minded here? Or I don't know, because I don't know this culture firsthand.
Divya, what's your opinion on this in terms of like the kind of culture differences in a relationship?
I feel like on top of coming out of London, so obviously being in a relationship with someone who lived in Norwich like you guys, we were two very different people as well. Like, even though he was half Mauritian, I was Mauritian, there was this massive difference between us. And it was like, I thought I could just talk to him about anything and anything to do with Mauritius. Like, even though I was brought up here, my parents raised me, with the Mauritian kind of roots. And so I thought, oh, it's going to be easy with this guy. Like, we got along really well as friends and everything. But then when it came to talking about the culture and everything, he had no clue. And I was like,
what about the Mauritian culture?
yeah, like, just about, like, he knew about Mauritius and everything, about food and all of that. But it was like, he just didn't really know about, like, the cultural things, like, things about Sega, like the way families come together and, all of that. And it was just like, oh, this is interesting. Like, I feel like, you know what? I feel like it like with London, especially, like how Manti was saying about her boyfriend, we kind of grew up in this like diverse community, in this like diverse. There's so many different people that we've met in London and become friends with. Like, for me, I've got like a massive friendship group with like different people, like Punjabi, Gujarati, Black, different kinds. And then when I started dating him and everything, it was like, he just was completely different. But I feel like it was the way he was brought up in this kind of different community, and he didn't have like the same amount of diversity within his friendship group or anything. But I don't know. I feel like it can be difficult in some sense, because it's like when you try and talk to them about culture, sometimes they act interested, and then other times it's like, I don't really want to know. Or sometimes, like, I'll be singing songs in the car, like I'll put Sega on something and I'll be like singing my heart, and he's like turning it down and acting all embarrassed, and it's like, why are you embarrassed about it? What have you got to be embarrassed about? And it's just like, oh, I don't know, I just feel embarrassed about it. And I just, it's weird, really. But I feel like if I was to date anyone now that was outside of like my culture or anything, I'd still kind of be myself in terms of wanting to talk about my culture and talking about, even though the fact that I was brought up here, I love being Mauritian, British Mauritian. I don't know. It just depends on how you are with a person and how comfortable you are about talking about these things.
A lot of people like are embarrassed about they haven't had that exposure to like the Mauritian, and that is one part of me as well that like that's when I'm like myself, like 100%. You're blasting out like a Sega, like the old one, and you're literally singing, dancing your heart out. That is like me. And if I can't like share that with someone else, or they're not open to see it, like I can understand why there'll be a clash there. And but, because like, they haven't been.
No, saying like with me, like for instance, if I was blasting out music in the car, like if it was Sega or anything, and he would turn it down, it would kind of make me feel bad in a way that I'd be like, I shouldn't talk about this then, or maybe I should just stop listening to Sega in front of him, which then ends up reflecting on me to say, okay, maybe I'll just stop listening to it then. And it's like, it can affect you in some sense, like when you've been with someone for so long as well. Like I remember when I was with, like outside of marrying or outside of dating someone who's completely different, it kind of comes to friendship groups as well. Like I completely lost my identity in school. I had a friendship group which were all Asian, and it was all nice and everything, and then things happened, so I kind of went in a new friendship group which was mostly like white girls, and I kind of lost my roots in some sense, where I was like, I just didn't really care about the culture anymore, and it didn't feel like myself. And it was only until uni that I started to get back in touch with my roots and get in touch with wanting to have that exposure to it again. And that's where I started to speak Creole and listen to music and appreciate the finer things about our culture.
I feel like I think a big part of growing up is being comfortable with your culture and knowing where you where you feel comfortable with it, where you don't, if that makes sense. Because I don't think you can ever meet someone that's exactly on the right level as you. Maybe you can, but I feel like because we're all so different, the way we're raised, the ethnic part of like you know, whether you're Indo-Mauritian or Afro-Mauritian or whatever kind of Mauritian you are, it's very different to be exactly on the same level as everyone else. So even if you were to get with someone of the same culture, I think there would be differences.
I feel like there's another difference between like British Mauritians that were born here and then Mauritians who were born in Mauritius or were maybe born here but grew up in Mauritius. Like there is, like Mansi said, there is a massive difference between the two of us. So
like sometimes people can not discriminate but kind of distance yourself, like they will distance themselves from you based on like where you've been brought up in terms of your Mauritian identity. Like I remember being at uni and people who were coming from Mauritius would say that Mags and I aren't Mauritian enough. Like they would make fun of aren't Mauritian enough, would take the piss out of our Creole that we spoke. And then there'd be Mauritians who were born and raised here who wanted nothing to do with us, like literally nothing to do with us. So that's kind of like the differences, the extremes we've gone through. And then, you know, we had our parents at the time saying to us, why are you getting involved with Mauritians?
Yeah, I've had that so many times.
So
me too.
This is the thing, like these are like all the different experiences we come across. So I don't know, I feel like how do you, like even if you were to end up with someone who is Mauritian or not Mauritian, like there would be so many differences you'd have to deal with even within the category.
Completely agree.
Yeah, and that's
No, so my parents actually, they're completely different, like culture, like they're different Hindus. So my mum is Tamil Mauritian and my dad is Vedic, like Hindu Mauritian. So there was so much, like there was a massive clash because obviously they celebrate things differently, they do things differently. And you know, my mum and dad, they came to this country, they met like whilst doing nurse training and everything, fell in love, happy days, and they thought, you know, they had this bubble around them. And then the moment they go tell their families, there's just all of this palap, man, about, oh, but you can't marry inside like this culture, like he's this, he's that, the other. My dadima, she always used to call my mum names. And it was like it was confusing for me and my brother, like growing up and we were younger, we were like, why does she not like mum? And things like that. But like we grew up to kind of understand that, but then we kind of questioned why? We're all Mauritian at the end of the day. Like why have we got to be so against each other? Even the fact that different types of Hindus are against each other. Like
yeah, for sure. I think we're so pitted against each other, to be really honest. Definitely. And I think it's kind of, it's really up to us, I think our generation to, like I always say this, there's so many differences between us that we just at this point have to embrace it, because if we go further into the little details, it just gets too much.
Yeah, and it's counterproductive.
There's so much to it. Like, as much as I love being Mauritianated, I've witnessed so many problems with my own like Mauritian identity growing up. It's like, for me, as a dark, like especially as a dark-skinned Mauritian, it's kind of like, oh, she's too black, she's this, she's that, the other, and it's like, so am I Mauritian or not? And the other thing is like, so I remember one time in school there was this other Mauritian girl. She was Muslim Mauritian. She was a lot fairer than me. And she didn't want to be friends with me. I was more than happy to be friends with her and get to know another Mauritian girl, because, you know, I didn't know anyone else. Yeah, and I wanted to get to know her, and she didn't want to get to know me because I was apparently the blickest Mauritian she'd ever seen.
What the hell?
Whoa, mate, there is so many issues going on here.
Yeah, I know. And I was just like, so she doesn't want to get to know me just because of my colour? Like, you'd think that it's not just culture, like our culture differences, but it's also skin colour as well. And I'm just like, well, this is something, like, my.
Oh my God.
The colorism is real.
Yeah. Do you think that comes from like the way you've been brought up? I do you think that plays a big part? Like,
yeah, 100%. I think a lot of Mauritian people take up from their parents, and they a lot of people are like, our parents, they picked everything up from their ancestors or, their parents, but it's really up. And like, this is the same for us. We pick up so many of our opinions and assumptions from our parents, but it's really up to us to kind of be like, does this fit in with my morals? Is this really what I want to believe? But I think a lot of times that kind of questioning doesn't happen until much, much later on. And for some people, never really. Like, what Divya's saying about how like her parents, like their differences was a big thing. But even within my family, like this expectation from an Asian, for me, like as a I don't know, Hindu Mauritian girl, it's kind of, oh, you're going to end up with a Mauritian person, and especially a Hindu person. But it's like, where do you get that here? Like, where do you get that? Like, this is the thing. I feel like when you get married to someone, it's also dependent on like them, like, and their culture, because I think some like different people are passionate about their cultures differently. Like some people don't really mind dipping into your culture, whereas some people expect you to fully be part of their culture. Like some people don't mind, but I think it's about having that understanding between two people. Like how do you want to raise your kid?
I was going to say, in terms of my parents, like even though they came to this country, and even though, they came to study here, they came with an open mind and anything, they still kept their roots and they still kept a part of them. And even to date, the way they have brought me up with these same roots, I kind of expect to carry that on, even within my own, like when I have my own kids, I will still want to bring them up. But I think in some way, not on the same level as my parents, because like the way my parents brought me up, they've taught me how to speak Creole. Like from a baby, they've been speaking Creole to me and everything. But with me, it's kind of like I would be more lenient, not because I don't want them to have the exposure to culture, but I just feel like I know that I had a cousin who grew up with a German dad and a Mauritian mum, and she, like, bless her, she's so young, but she was like, do I speak German? Do I speak English? Do I speak Creole? And it's just like they get so, even though they have so much like exposure to everything, they get so confused themselves. And witnessing that, I wouldn't want my child to go through that. I would be like more I'd be easing on them. I would teach them about like the culture and about the religion and all of that kind of stuff. Because but I wouldn't be as strict as my parents or as traditional as them in some sense. I don't know, what do you think about, like, I mean, for me, I would be more lenient about it. Like, I would still want them to have exposure to it, but I wouldn't want them to feel confused about their identity. I'd want them to figure it out on their own as well, especially as they're growing up, like I basically did.
It's such a hard question to answer in the sense that when you think about children, they are already so hard to raise in a way because they are so complex. But just the thought of if I were to move to England and I'd have to carry my culture with me, I think it's really hard to expose your child to Mauritian culture continuously while living abroad because there's already so much of a limited resource there. Like even me being here at the moment, there's already a cultural change going on in Mauritius at the moment that I'm not experiencing and I'm having to secondhand experience it. And that in itself, as a parent, now I'm thinking in the future, as a parent, not being on the island and having to keep up with the new cultural updates, I just really don't know how I myself would be able to navigate cope with that. Because even when you look at the Mauritian influencer industry at the moment, the Mauritian music industry at the moment, when I was younger, I didn't have these kind of visuals for myself when I was growing up. And these music videos now, they have about 4 million views. They're blowing up and they have really high production. And same thing with the culture on Instagram and all these things. And it's just, the culture is becoming more and more westernized in a way. And it's just hard to keep up with how it's been westernized, but also has held that Mauritian essence, that culture. It's a new discovery for myself. So now I'm thinking when I'm older and there are going to be so many more new things coming about, and things are going to be so much more different in 20 years because things have changed in the past 3 years so quickly that it's genuinely so impressive. But scary at the same time, because I haven't gone back in 2 years. And in these 2 years, I've already felt a bit lost in the sense of I don't really know where I stand with my culture at the moment, because I feel like my culture has progressed so much more. And I've just been on the side experiencing it from like an outsider's point of view. It's been a really weird experience.
I was actually going to say Mancy's point is a very good point, which I didn't think about, because right now my sort of thoughts on carrying on the culture, like I really want my kids to know all about the Mauritian culture, like speak Creole, speak French, and they can learn English when they're at school, because I think that's really important for me to pass it on to them. So then when they grow up, they have a choice whether to, you know, carry it on or not. Hopefully they do, and still be in touch with the culture, because I don't want them to, like, you know, when we go to Mauritius and they're like, it's a foreign to them. I mean, yes, it will be, but I do want them to sort of recognize some stuff. But then, like you said, like I haven't even been back for like the last since 2012, so it's been like 8 years. So you're right, I have no
this is why, like, I would want to bring up my children to kind of experience it, like give them that exposure to it, but also let them understand their identity as well. Because I remember when I grew up with my parents, and I remember, like, as a child, I don't really have many memories of being in Mauritius, but then when I went back, I was 17. So this is like after a couple of years. I went back when I was 17, and I thought, oh, you know, I'll be fine. I know about the culture. I know about everything. And I went there, and oh my God, I had the biggest shock. Everything was just so different to what I expected. Like, even going there, I thought, oh, you know, I could speak Creole and everything. And they would, you know, they like, if I went Bazaar, they'd be like, oh, don't speak Creole.
Oh,
so
yeah.
you're from the UK.
Yeah, no, literally.
Okay. It's like, okay, cool. And like, this is it. Like, even like little things like that, I thought I'd be confident and that I'll know about the culture and I'll know how to talk to people and everything. And then I go there and witness everything, even watching the news. And I thought, wow, this is completely different to what I thought. Like, growing up as a teenager, trying to understand this, it was a massive contrast to what I was actually brought up with. Like, even going to Cavadi, for instance, in the UK, we go around the temple. That's it. In Mauritius, you're going around the whole freaking country on this like thing, and it's just like, oh wow, okay. Like, I completely agree with you, Nancy. Like, the fact that things are changing culturally, even if it is like the music and, you know, all of that, it's a massive contrast to what I expected.
Things are changing so quickly. It's quite scary, to be honest. But
even today.
I was just going to bring it back to your point about bringing up children, and how, as someone who is British Mauritian, I have felt this kind of exclusion from my family members who are British Mauritian and they have been brought up in England mostly. What I've had from them is a sort of exclusion where it was they kind of looked down on us. But I don't blame them for it, because they were children back then. But who I do blame for it is the parents. And this is when I bring it back to my point of bringing up my children, if I were to bring them up in England as a Mauritian person, is what they've done there is, I'm pretty sure they have never had any input from anyone else who was Mauritian and who liked their culture, because the only person they had was their dad, and their dad had moved to England at the age of 18. So there wasn't much there to have some input from. And this is when I always say it takes a village to bring up a child. It doesn't take two parents, it takes a whole community. Yeah. And if you would want your children to keep that culture, that Mauritian culture, it doesn't only take the parents, it doesn't only take showing them videos, taking them to the country, because that's just going to be a massive culture shock for them. What I think is you need to have a group of people. It doesn't necessarily mean friends, but at least acquaintances or people you trust, to bring up your children around them, and they have that essence, that Mauritian culture essence, in their own values, in their own family and all those things. So it kind of, what is happening here is you are sharing that culture, even though it's the same Mauritian culture, it's two different views of it. But if you are compatible with that and you would want your child to be exposed to that, I think that definitely helps them and shapes them as a person who's comfortable with their culture, instead of feeling as if they have to push their culture away from them because it's so alien to them, that it becomes a point of a kind of hatred towards your own culture because you've been so alienated from it. And not because it's your fault, it's because people have just failed to help you integrate into that culture properly and make you feel accepted. Like that's how I think is going on there, to be honest.
So with all the scenarios that we've spoken about, and like from our experience and the relationships we're currently in, past experiences, we've all assumed that we want to bring up our children with the Mauritian culture, whatever that means to us. But what happens when you're with someone who is completely different culture to you, and you have to find the balance between the two? Like where do you draw that line? Like, not draw the line, but how do you what's your opinion on that then? Because then it doesn't just become about, oh, you know, I want to bring my kids up with Mauritian, yeah, okay, but then there's also someone else who also wants that about their culture. So how do you navigate around that, or what are your opinions around that?
So me and my boyfriend have kind of spoken on it, just because we're reaching that age now where we're about to graduate and everything. So we kind of have to have those conversations. But basically, he's Jamaican, but he's British-born Jamaican, and he does have family members back in Jamaica. So with the topic of if we were to have children together, it's a bit... It wasn't that hard for him to think about, oh, but my children are gonna have my culture because I had it. I had a very big family members around me. He's got a massive family, and he's been brought up with a lot of like cultural values from his own like Jamaican roots, and still stuck with his British culture. He has never really struggled with his identity because he would always go back to Jamaica. His parents, his family members, as I said, they were all very loving, very supportive. They still stick to their culture but also have the British culture with them, and they're all second generation British born, so it's not like they've all moved from Jamaica. They've all been brought up in England too, and he's seen that in his parents, he's seen that in his family members. So I think growing up he was comfortable with his culture and how it was torn into two. It was never for him. And also the thing is, with British culture, it does have a lot of Jamaican culture in it, in the London scene. So I think growing up, he already had that comfort. But now when I discussed that with him, I was telling him, I don't think my children will ever have that comfort because Mauritian culture is not integrated into London culture or British culture. You don't really see that. So for me, it was just, I think with his side of the culture, there's already that baseline there for the child to be able to have experiences from and to have a sense of belonging. But with my culture, there isn't that baseline there. And that's when I was telling him how the older we get, I definitely think I should have more and more Mauritian friends around me. I don't think there should be that, oh, well, they are Mauritian, I don't want to be friends with them, that a lot of Mauritian people have as a mentality. Because we are progressing as a generation. Definitely, it is something that I hate a lot too, but I understand it to a certain degree. I do understand it. Because a lot of us have progress in the sense that we are more open-minded. We definitely aren't homophobic, transphobic, or all these things. And I personally, as someone who, as I said, identifies as bisexual and is also a person of color, I just would not be able to put my child in that kind of an environment that is so toxic and detrimental to them. I just wouldn't ever be able to do that. Now, if you're excluding someone on the sense that they're homophobic, transphobic, anything against human rights, that's completely fair. But to push someone out because they're essentially too Mauritian for you, I think that's a very narcissistic point of view in my eyes, because it's a very, oh, I'm better than you. But how are you better than that person? It's very contradictory. It's very contradictory because you're saying, oh, I want more of this culture, but I don't want more of you. I don't want more of people who have the same culture as me. No, stay away. That's just very hypocritical. And that's also what I told him. And I was telling him about how it's so different because he hasn't seen that in his Jamaican culture, because they just love each other so much. They have such a sense of community in that culture that clashes with the lack of sense of community in my culture. And this is when I was telling him how I genuinely don't know how to go through this in terms of marriage, in terms of him coming to Mauritius. I'm scared of him coming to Mauritius, let's be honest. And even just having children, all of it is just so scary to me, but for him, this is when you see the difference of how comfortable he is with his culture and how to integrate that in his child's life. And I'm struggling, because I think we can all agree as Mauritians that the whole aspect of being Mauritian is so complex.
Yes.
You can never
definitely
Yep.
yeah, you can never describe it. If someone were to ask me what is it to you to be Mauritian, and to other people, I just stand there like I have no idea. I have no idea how to pen this down properly. Genuinely, there are so many different ways.
Just identifying yourself as well. Like, even for me, I didn't grow up in Mauritius. I identify as a British Mauritian, but even then, there's so much to that, and it's just like, bloody hell. Am I Mauritian?
Definitely.
It's just like I completely get where you're coming from with that, because it's just like hearing that he's got that kind of sense of place and sense of like he's got that comfort of it. Whereas us, it's like, for me as well, like going to Mauritius and witnessing the whole identity crisis of you can't talk to this person, you can't talk to that person.
Oh God, yeah.
You know, that kind of thing as well. It's just it is so confusing. So it's deep.
That's what I always say about Mauritius. We have this facade that we are so multicultural, but we're not culturally sensitive at all, because we have such a division between all cultures, but somehow we pretend that we're in such a good harmony.
That's
when we're
very
really not.
true. When it's really not, because like we have this like the outlook to other people like we're paradise, we're this like definitely multicultural country, but in reality, like you're right, we don't actually have a really good sense of community. Yes, there are aspects there, and that's why I'm really grateful for what the experience I had at uni. Like we all, I think like I met a range of different like Mauritians, where the internationals, but like overall my experience was really like it was great, so I'm grateful for that. But I recognize that that's not the same if you're in Mauritius or other places.
I think it's very, like you said, it's a facade. Like it's very out there in terms of, oh yeah, okay, you know, for Diwali we'll go give your next door neighbor Chinese sweets and things like that, and like everyone celebrates something great, perfect. You're getting the biryani for Eid, but the reality is, the moment it steps into your house and it becomes about marriage, it becomes about your friends, then it's a very, very different conversation.
Very different indeed.
Very, very, yeah. It's so weird that you say that as well. Like Hansini, like for instance, I witnessed that myself when it was like Eid and they would bring things over, like bringing biryani over. It's like, oh, that's nice of them, but then like, why can't I marry a Muslim then? If you're happy and friendly with them, why can't I marry one? Like, it's so hard. It's like, I don't get it. It's like, in some way, they're like, it's a bit like, it's like being a hypocrite in some ways, because it's like, you're welcoming them, you're friendly with them, you're being nice to them, but I can't be married to them, or I can't engage with them in that sort of way. I can't be friends with them in that sort of way because they're different to me.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, there's also the hypocritical part of it that I always laugh at when my mum tries to bring up any of those things, is the whole idea that the West have men or women, but technically men in this situation, that men are so much more developed and so much more accepting, understanding, blah blah blah. But there's this thing that the West always pushes onto the East, that our culture in the East is so much more orthodox, when that is a complete lie. When you compare the statistics of it, like when you go down to facts, when you compare the statistics of it, you have the same misogynistic issues in both sides of the sphere. So it's just really hypocritical to me when parents are like, oh no, but you should marry someone who's white, who will have money, who will do this, blah blah blah. And it's just like, no, you will find the same level of trash in that community as you would in your own community.
100%. But see, that's what I don't get, where that well said. I don't get where that thing comes from. Like, oh, if you marry, a white person, like your life will be better.
Right.
Honestly,
sometimes they would rather you marry like a white person versus anyone else.
Honestly,
or if they have more money, or if they're, they can provide for you or anything. I know for a fact my mum's just like, oh, you should marry someone who can cater to your needs. I'm like, but what are my needs? I just want to be happy.
No, it is. It's tricky because then it comes to a point where sometimes it's like, luckily, like my family, they're very open. So like, I know whoever I choose, like they'll be okay with it. But I know it's not the same for other people. So it's like sometimes, where do you draw the line? Like, do you make your parents happy or do you make yourself happy?
I was just going to say I have been in this situation a couple of times now because one, I had to come out to my parents that I like women. And then two, I was in a relationship before this relationship. I was in a relationship with someone who was Telugu. And that in itself was really complex because my mum would always have something bad to say, no matter who I brought home. And I came to that conclusion the more I grew up, because I just realized that that's just her being a brown mum, and not to be stereotypical, but that's exactly what she was being. Because when you look at who she befriends and who she has in her life, her statements really contradict what she says she feels. And that's when I stopped giving a shit, because the more she started speaking, the more I realized that this is just a lot of internalized colorism, racism, all these things. They're just so internalized that I can't help her with it. And it's not my duty to fit her ideologies, because I'm a different person in a different generation, and these things are not going to matter when I'm at the age where I need to get married, because I'm going to be financially independent, I'm going to have my own life, things are going to be so much more different, that I can't keep living up to their expectations, because I've done my bit. I've reached an age now where I genuinely need to start thinking about myself, and not in a selfish way.
I don't think you're selfish at all. I mean, like, for me, I spent a lot of my teenage life and uni life living for others and living for my parents, getting that degree, making them proud. And I've only now realized, like last year, to live for myself and do things for myself, not to make others, including my parents, happy. Like, I love my parents. I love that they've brought me up and they've been able to look after me and everything. But at the end of the day, not being horrible or anything, but when they die, I'm going to be left on my own. True. What am I going to do? Like, I have to start thinking about things for myself. I have to start thinking about how I'm going to, like, keep myself stable. I can't,
Definitely.
You know, if, like, let's say, for instance, God forbid, my mom dies tomorrow or my dad dies, like, there's something tragic happens and I was living for them.
It will feel like there's no purpose.
Exactly. So now, you know, it really made me realize I really need to start living for myself and doing things for myself. And I don't think it's selfish at all. Like, I've had a lot of people to say to me, oh, I think it's selfish that you're doing this for your own. It's like, but why? I'm living for my own, you know, like, even for, so growing up as, as someone who did media studies, I was bad-mouthed at all, saying, why are you doing media studies? It's so easy. It's this, it's that, the other. You should do something in, like, dentistry or doctor, be a doctor and all of that. And it's just like, but I'm passionate about media. I want to do it because I have a passion for it. And it's just like, but you shouldn't. And that's where I kind of started to realize, I don't care about your opinion. I don't care that you've got to say that about me. I'm going to do what I want.
Yeah.
So
I think it's like something that you have to get through by yourself and decide, because like, for the longest time I battled with this thing of like when you hold your parents in a high regard, like, in terms of, you don't obviously want to hurt them, but at the end of the day, and I felt for the longest time like making my own decision meant, you know, like Divya said, you know, you're hurting them, but then you need to realize, is the cost of, you know, your decision, are you willing to bear that cost? Some people are, which is fine. Like, some people would happily go with their parents' decision, which
I've got friends who've done medicine or something that they don't have a passion in, and they're now miserable. They regret because it's a lot of regret on them, and it's just like that, in some senses, it's not their fault, but it is as well, because it's just like, you know, in what you want to do in your heart, so why didn't you go with that?
The other point I was going to say is, like, when you're making that decision, whichever way it is, going with what your parents want versus what you want, I think at that point you need to have a good understanding of what you are okay with in terms of consequences, because some people would rather go with what their parents say and it makes them happier to go down that route, and bear the consequence of, you know, like, not doing what they want to do, versus, for me personally, that's not a consequence I can bear. But I think it's more about knowing yourself, what you want for you, versus, you know, you should do. Either way, it's like about knowing. I think it boils down to knowing yourself and what consequences you're okay to live with either way.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's also that toxic cycle that we've seen in a lot of POC families. Basically, it's that projection that parents have, and that self kind of hatred that they have towards their own values, but they end up projecting that on their children, and they kind of enforce that on their children. And I think that's quite toxic in its own ways. But it's coming from a very innocent place most of the times, because it has been indoctrinated in us through religion, culture, orthodox values from parents from back in the day. And it's quite sad to see most of the time, because as I said, it's just projection again. And for children who want to keep feeling that sense of validation from their parents, and I think a lot of POC children struggle with that, is that constant wanting to be validated by your parents. And even though when I was growing up, my parents were never hard on me about getting really good results, but they had that sense of what's the word, they had the expectation, and you could feel it as someone who was getting good grades. And it was always that, oh, but you are getting good grades, it's not that we want you to keep it up. Yeah, literally. It's that constant feeling of, oh, but I need to make them proud. And I don't know why it's such a big thing in the POC community, not just Brown, to be honest. You see this a lot. It's always this race towards who's going to make the parents more proud, who's going to be the best, who's going to be the topper. It's that constant race that has been put into our culture. And this is the part of my culture that I don't really affiliate with anymore, because it's very tiring. It induces a lot of anxiety, because this is when I had to tell my parents about the fact that I was dating a black man. That was really hard for me, in the sense that I had worked so hard my entire life trying to please my parents and make sure that they have the best life from as a child, and not giving them any worries, any kind of like disappointments, because we had been through a really rough patch as a family when I was younger, and that kind of put that into me, that I always wanted to make them happy. And when I was happy in my relationship now, it was such a big struggle going up to them and telling them. It was the kind of anxiety that I would not wish upon anyone, because they are your parents, and it's a tough conversation, because I could have fully walked out of that conversation being disowned, and that is so scary. Because so many literally so many people say they know their parents would never do that, and then you see them on the streets, and it's just crazy that parents would do that. And it's scary. It's genuinely very, very scary.
I also we're talking a lot about parents and, you know, like the relationship between your parent and you, but I also think that kind of the toxic mindset could also come from friends, like, or people of similar communities to you. Like, it might not be so out there, but I think surrounding yourself with people of like similar mindsets that haven't, maybe they've been passed down these kind of mentalities, but they're not kind of questioning it or changing it, and you being around them, that can also really like that can play a big part in your life, I would say. Because it's not just your parents, it can also be like, you know, what your friends who you're befriending think about your relationship.
Oh yeah, definitely. That was such a big part of my relationship with my boyfriend, is when I told my friends about it, if any of them had any kind of rude thing to say or object to my relationship, that would have ended there and then, because I just don't see the point of having a friendship like that is in no way supportive or mentally good for yourself. It's just added on pressure.
Growing up, I think this is another like identity thing for me, especially when I was, you know, in secondary school with hanging out with some white girls. You know, they were just like, oh, in future, like, don't do this and don't do that, and they were like super controlling of me. Like, this is how I lost my identity as a Mauritian person, because it was just like, oh, but like, for instance, if my parents had an argument and I just wanted to rant to them about it, the first thing they said was, oh, they'll probably get a divorce or something. And it's just like, what? But it's like, they have like a different mindset to it. And that, but it's just like, this is it. Like, they'll have something bad to say and they wouldn't be supportive of that. And it would just like really kind of come onto me.
No, it is difficult to navigate.
But I had a question for you, Mansi, actually. Were your parents happy with you coming and studying here?
Well, my mum did not want me to stay in Mauritius, and my dad was indifferent. My dad is like really indifferent to a lot of things. he's just in the background. He doesn't really care. As long as I'm here healthy and happy, that's what he cares about. But because of certain difficulties that we faced with Mauritian culture, at the end of the day, I would call it Mauritian culture because it's the toxic idea that men shouldn't be punished for their actions in a way. But while I was growing up, we had a couple of incidents with a person that I don't want to name, who kind of put my environment in danger. I was put in danger. My family members were put in danger. So it wasn't really a choice of if I wanted to go abroad. It was kind of already imposed on me by the age I was 13 back then. So by the age of 13, it was already a goal for me that I was going to leave because my mum had already put it, already put it down and very straightforward that your sister has left and you're leaving too with her. And it's for your own safety. So in that sense, I have a very unique experience with how my parents wanted me to go abroad. But the one thing my mum wanted for me when I was going abroad is she really wanted me to have a white boyfriend, which was which was a bit like, well, what happens will happen. But that also led me to being really naive. And this is one of the things I've always said when I first came to uni is people never realize how naive I was, despite the fact that I was very culturally aware and very comfortable with a lot of things about myself. But I was very, very naive about a lot of things, and especially not to be like that, but especially white men, because I had never been exposed to one or most of them like that back in Mauritius. I had never really experienced being friends with a white person, being in their circle. And that's another topic that like Mauritius is still struggling to accept the fact that they aren't looking at how the whole history with white people.
Yeah, I mean, like, I know that you're going out with the Jamaican guy. If you were to ever take him to Mauritius, how do you think they would react to that?
He was supposed to come to Mauritius last year before COVID happened. This was when I was literally just referring to him as my friend. But there was suspicions there that he wasn't my friend. And then the more we got into it, the more I felt like I was being very dishonest with myself. And if I was very happy and proud of my relationship, I should just be really straightforward. So that's when I decided to tell my parents about it. But even when we go back to Mauritius, I had to have this chat with my boyfriend and tell him that it's not because I'm ashamed of him and I would never want to do this, but I kind of have to do this because of the culture there. I just would not want people to say anything bad to him, because if they did, I would lose it. I would get really angry and I would get into very compromising situations. I don't want to mess around with certain people in Mauritius, considering my experiences with how it hasn't been good with dealing with Mauritian men, and certainly young Mauritian men. It's very hard to deal with because they have they are technically the same. They have the same level of priority in the Mauritian culture compared to white men in the Western culture. There's that same level of like, you're the best and nothing can be better than you. Is that ideology that has been put into their heads, and it's just very hard to deal with that. And I just don't want him to get into any trouble. I don't want his safety to be compromised or anything like that. So that's why I was like, if we go to Mauritius, I will probably have to refer to you as my friend, but to people who I care about, to people who love me, to people who I know genuinely accept me for who I am, I don't give a shit. I will call you my boyfriend in front of them. And he knows that. He knows that the people who matter, they matter. Yeah.
I mean, that's really good, like the fact that he understands that, because I know I had a cousin who had a white boyfriend, and, you know, like, she was like you, like, she had to stay, like, she wanted to just keep to herself about it, like, she didn't really want to say anything, like, she called him a friend, and in some way he was like, he didn't understand it. He actually got really hurt by it. Like, as a British Mauritian, like, obviously I knew him, and I was just like, you have to understand, it's not easy for her. And he's like, well, why can't she just refer me as her boyfriend? And it's just like, it's not the same. It's like, people talk and they talk bad things, and she just doesn't want that for you, because she'll get so hurt on your behalf, and then it's her fault for it. And even though it's not her fault and it's their fault, the moment she opens her mouth and starts defending you and everything, there is going to be a massive palab over that.
Oh god, oh yeah, the whole sense of palab.
Oh,
Palab means gossip.
I love a bit palab in it. Then maybe we should have like a different, like, a podcast called Palab.
I think we should, you know. But do you know what annoys me? What annoys me is most of the time, majority of the time, it's like a balab gossip over nothing. It's like literally
It's like they just want
over.
to cause like shit stir for
Yeah,
no reason. It's just
yes.
like, why?
They love
Why?
adding fuel to the fire.
It comes in episode. Just when you think it's over, it's something else. Like it's like
Something
another
else
story.
pops up.
It's like it
Yeah.
stops and then it's like la recommence and it's
Oh,
like
Yeah.
God, yeah.
And it's like, how do people
Oh.
have so much energy?
But do you know
to
what?
just
Sometimes
chat
I
nonsense?
literally I question this. I'm like, is this like what I talk about? Like, am I just being hypocritical because? I mean, obviously, I've got my friends and I talk to them about things, but do I do this as well? And then I have to question and sit and I'm like, no, like it's very, very different. You make a
Very
choice.
different.
You make
Yeah.
a choice. You always have a choice in what you want to talk about and where you want to spend your energy. And if that's in other people's business, then that's where you're choosing to spend it.
Completely agree.
No, and I get you, man. It's so hard. It's like I'm so glad he understands that because not a lot of people do understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fact that you can't speak up for them for obvious reasons, and it's like in some ways it really hurt my cousin when she took him, and it led to a lot of problems for both of them because obviously it's like he just didn't understand that, and it was just, it was so like obviously it was hard for him because he felt hurt that she couldn't be honest and open about things even to her own kind of close family, but at the same time it was just
not to say that he's in the wrong for the way he feels, but I do think that with being Western you have a sense of economic leverage that comes with it, so you already have that kind of privilege where you have a community and that is more accepting than what someone in the eastern side of the world would have, or the southern side of the world as we are. But I think with that comes the responsibility of the fact that you need to understand that the other person is doing that for your safety. And this is when, if I was dating a white person and they were angry at me for saying those things, I think I probably would not have been okay with that because you're coming from a sense of privilege that you have a community that is completely accepting, but you're completely not acknowledging that I don't have that privilege, that I don't come from a safe community that will accept you. I don't come from a community that is necessarily going to even want us to get married or let us get married, because there are those situations and I've seen them. So when someone comes from that point of view and they have an advantage in the relationship, I don't really agree with that notion. I don't really agree with that way of thinking, because what you're saying here is, oh, you fitted into my culture, but me trying to fit into your culture, I don't get it and I don't want to try. That's what it really says to me. That is when, like, if my boyfriend had probably been a bit like angry about it, understandable, but to the point to say that, oh, but I don't really completely understand it, I don't agree with it, I don't want to do it, that's when you're not making a compromise. Because if you're going to date someone with a culture that's inferior in a way to yours in terms of their values and how they see things, then you need to be able to understand that the compromise is going to be detrimental to you in a way, but it's how it is, and that's how you need to navigate your relationship if you're going to date someone like that.
Absolutely, I completely agree.
I think when you're stepping from two different worlds, it just requires like a shit ton of understanding. It's very
And
like patience, understanding and patience, because it's like literally coming from two perspectives, and there are things that you know, I think that when you're stepping into a relationship, there are things I think you're aware of that you can see, like you know, okay, these are our differences from like this top layer, but then the more you go into a relationship, the more you realize there are so many other things that you hadn't even seen coming. So then
absolutely,
then
well,
I think that's when it requires a lot of, like Mag said, patience.
I think it really does. Well, like, you may know a person inside and out and be with them for so long, but then there are other things that come with it as well, like family. Like, there's so many different things, and like, I feel like this is like the difficult thing about marrying someone of another religion or culture. It's the fact that it's not like, you may love them inside and out and want to be with them or anything, but then are you okay with the whole change of their family and how their family are, or like your family? Like, for instance, like, just giving an example here, like me growing up in like a brown community, go to a restaurant with your family, your cousins and everything, you got your uncles and that fighting for the bill, right? Fighting for the bill. And it's just like, oh God, here we go. But like, it's a nice thing because it's just, oh no, I'll pay for it. And it's like, it'll come back to that.
So, ending point, guys. From our conversation, has your opinion changed or has it not changed from for the question of, do you think marrying someone outside of your culture means you lose out or your kids will lose out on carrying forward your culture? And what are your opinions in terms of, if you're single right now, I mean, will you consider someone outside of your culture or will you not?
In terms of my opinion of whether you're going to lose out on your culture or your children and all of that, I think my opinion is still quite the same, considering the fact that I'm already in a relationship where we're having to navigate both cultures and different ideologies and all those things. I think it all comes with how much you communicate with your partner and how honest you are, because the more you hide secrets about your culture, the more it's going to get toxic for the both of you, because there's going to be a complete lack of understanding there. And I think also from the get-go, you have to set out your boundaries and make sure that the person is okay with those boundaries, because you can't push those boundaries onto someone. You have to be quite clear-cut with the fact that this is my boundaries and this is why. And if you're not okay with that, we can either work around them, compromise, or communicate. Again, communication is just key. And for people who possibly are thinking of getting into a relationship where you're dating someone from a different culture, it's a scary thing to do, but also just be confident. If you know you like the person, just be confident in what you feel and how you feel, and just be okay with the fact that you are going to probably lose a couple of things from your own culture, because if you're coming from the Mauritian culture, I mean, you're probably going to lose a little bit of it because the accessibility to your culture is very limited compared to other cultures out there. So you have to be kind of comfortable with that idea. But again, just go for it. And if it works, it works. Just make sure that you're completely honest and completely straightforward with what you want from the relationship and where you want it to go, honestly.
Yeah, definitely. Divya, thoughts?
I completely agree with Mansi here. Like everything that she's just said is on point. I agree that you should be comfortable with these things, and if you lose out, it will happen. But I feel like when it comes to that, like for me, if I'm liking someone and I'm willing to kind of go through a challenge of if I'm compatible enough for maybe their family or anything, I'm willing to go for it because I know myself and I know who I am as a person. Do I lose out on my culture? We're just gonna have to see about that. I don't think so. I mean, like, I'm very passionate about it, but at the same time, I completely agree with you in some sense that it just kind of boils down and comes down to that person. And I think like I said on my last point, it's just being patient about it and like being open and communicating these things to them. And you're like, if there is a potential future, then like it's just about being open in that case as well. So and in terms of things such as like introducing into the family and like all of that stuff as well, even though it's a massive difference to getting to know someone inside and out, it's like, am I willing to go through that challenge? We're just gonna have to wait and see.
Completely forgot to mention this when I was talking, but basically there's this Instagram account that I follow. When I was struggling with understanding how to deal with the whole backlash of dating a black man and being a brown woman and all those things, I tried to find a community, because that really helps. Finding a community and finding people who are going through the same things as you is just going to help you so much more. Because even telling my parents, that account really helped me come to terms with how to tell my parents, how to introduce him to my parents. And the account basically is called the Blinden Project.
They honestly, literally, it's so good. Their stories get me through the day. They make me happy.
Honestly, they make me so happy. It's just nice to see some success stories out there. Sorry.
And I think it's so important as well, like when you're going through something like this, to know that you're not alone. Like the more you're seeing people get together, your kids are seeing that, eventually your kids will see that you're currently seeing it. It makes a difference in terms of
it really does.
Knowing that it's a possibility. Like sharing your story is very, very powerful, because you never know who will be going, like, you know, what someone might get from a story that you share.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Like, the more we see it, the more like it will become the norm. Because I think, like I said before, like, it's all this competition or hypocrisy is very counterproductive. Like, and it's so much wasted energy as well. And then I was going to say, like, from my point of view, I think this conversation sort of opened up my mind a little bit, because I was sort of not in two minds, but no, obviously I want to keep my Mauritian culture. So then I was thinking the possible, like, the only way to do that is to marry a Mauritian guy. But then, like you've said, Divya, like, you dated a Mauritian guy, and even that caused a lot of problems. So like, it doesn't really matter whether they're Mauritian or not, because either way
there will still be problems.
Yeah, exactly.
Honestly.
And then what you said, Mansi, about like, it doesn't matter if you're teaching your kids the Mauritian culture that you know, but like in 10 years time, that's completely gonna change. Like, it's changing right now. So either way, like, we are going to be behind if you are in another country. So I think I didn't deep it like that before. So I
think especially Mansi's point, it really got me thinking about it. It's just like, oh damn. Oh
yeah, because I didn't think about it that way, because I remember like when I went back, even though everyone was friendly, but you do feel you're sort of still behind a little bit because you haven't been living there. But so I think it's just a case of communication, and whatever happens, like whoever you end up with, you're just gonna have to be open
definitely
with them, and just understand also where they come from and why they think the way they think. And then I think you can start to navigate. And the more we see like more different interracial inter-religion like couples, the more we'll start accepting. And hopefully, like, in my head, like, I really want to break that whole, you know, really like backward mindset of like, you shouldn't marry this person because they're X, Y, and Z. Like, I've really so I think that's my point of it. And I'm hopeful, positive, but also like there are a lot of things we still need to work through, I think.
And it's interesting to see how we've all come to this conversation from the point of view of the culture that isn't seen as much in society. And that's really interesting, because I would like to know how it is to be someone who's from the more prominent culture that is seen in society. As, let's say, my boyfriend, his culture will always be there. If we're going to stay in England, his culture is always going to be there. He's not really going to struggle with integrating that culture in his child's life. And navigating an intercultural relationship is so much more different in his eyes. And I think for people like that who have that advantage, the advice that I'd have for those people is just respect your partner and make sure you make communication as clear as you can, because a lot of the time it can come off as patronizing unintentionally. A lot of the the criticism that you'll have, it can come off as extremely patronizing, but it's not your fault. It's just you have to be very self-aware and careful with the way you phrase things. That's my only advice, basically.
Your perspective on different culture is what plays a big part in your relationship. Some people stepping into a relationship with someone of a different culture means losing out on their relationship. To other people, it means a gain of culture. Like, from my experience, I was with someone that was very, very different culturally. And for me, I realized that actually I gained so much from that experience. Like, I learned so much, and it actually made me appreciate my Mauritian culture even more, seeing them so proud of their culture. Your perspective on culture overall is what matters. Secondly, I think setting boundaries for yourself and the other person setting boundaries for themselves. I think Mansi previously mentioned this. I think it's really important. But in order to set those boundaries, it's kind of questioning your identity and what you're comfortable with. And thirdly, I was going to say communication, like you all said, is really, really important. being able to communicate your feelings, your perspective, but also understanding the other person. In hindsight, I realize a lot of times now that sometimes we listen to people, but we're not actually listening to them, and we're not really understanding them. And I think it boils down to experience as well, your experience of what you've witnessed, what you've seen, and you forming your opinions of those. And sometimes not having expectations of, like, you know, for example, like Mag said, going into a relationship with someone of the same culture, which for us would be all Mauritian, doesn't mean it's all going to be like perfect.
Glory days,
Completely agree.
And the other thing I was going to say is, like what Mag said about breaking down barriers and changing it. I think it's really important for our generation and for us to really question those stigmas, barriers, and all of those, because I think it causes a lot of damage to people who are going or who are stepping into these relationships. Long-term damage, short-term damage, whatever it is, because there's a lot of things that you have to question. You have to you really have to like dig deep in. And when you're having to face all these obstacles or whatever, it can really affect you. So I think it's really up to us to kind of change the narrative behind these relationships. And the other thing, another danger that I just thought of like not changing the barriers that I've seen is a lot of people are so willing to tick the boxes to please everyone else that they forget that they will be spending the relationship with this person. So by the time you found someone that ticks all the boxes, they seem perfect and you seem unfulfilled. You feel unfulfilled. So like sometimes we forget the whole point of being in a relationship is to find someone that you love and you're happy with, in the process of like trying to please everyone else, trying to do the right thing, all this other stuff. Like we tend to forget, you know what, like I actually need to enjoy this person's company. So those are kind of my points. Sorry, I just rattled through it. But
no, I completely agree.
There's no more like, oh, there's one path. We have more freedom now, and like we should embrace that. We should be grateful for that. If anything,
it's a privilege.
It's a goddamn privilege. Like,
we're going to round things up. We hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Let us know your thoughts on this topic. I think there's so many opinions and so many different perspectives. We'd love to hear your opinion. Thank you so much to Mansi and Divya for joining us and giving us some really valuable insight. I really enjoyed that episode.
Guys, I really enjoyed it as well. Thank you guys for inviting us to this.
Honestly, thank you guys for inviting us to this.
It's really enlightening to me now.
Yeah, really enlightening, and also really interesting to see the different point of views on this topic, because everyone has such a unique experience with being in an intercultural relationship. It's very, very unique. It's never the same.
hello and welcome to the Zoli Mamzel podcast with Magali
and Hansini, where we have thought-provoking conversations about journeys, life, and much more. Catch our latest episodes every Monday.
Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy.